me start out by saying I'm Faerie Pabich, and I happen to be the Director of Music and Liturgy here at the Cathedral. But I also happen to have been a very close personal friend of Sister Josephine Stewart, and I also was on the very first Beginning Experience team in Fort Worth, Texas. And a couple of years ago, in a conversation with Marian Christiana, who is the Director of Family Programs for the Diocese of Knoxville, we had a conversation about a Beginning Experience, and then I knew when the diocese began to support the Beginning Experience program. So when I got the email from Sister Josephine's brother Charlie that she had been moved to a hospice hospital in Fort Worth, and not that she had cancer, she did not, but that she was at the end of her life and they had moved her there for care in the last weeks of her life. I happened to shoot, I don't remember now how I happened to be corresponding with Karen Byrne, Marian's secretary, and I mentioned to her that Sister Josephine, that I'd heard from Charlie and that Sister Josephine was very, very ill, and she said, well gosh, we happen to have a Beginning Experience weekend going on this weekend, and that was the weekend that you all had just been on, and she said, I will send the word over there and ask them to offer prayers for her. So I want to thank you, first of all, for praying especially for her on that weekend. So as a result of all that going on back and forth, I learned that you all were going to be together this weekend when Karen said, would you be willing to come and share with the group your experiences with Sister Josephine and the early days of Beginning. And I said, you know, it would just be a very, very much a privilege for me because I feel like I'm being so honored to be able to be here with you and talk to you about her because she's such a wonderful person, and to be able to share with you sort of how this program came to be. And what we all have in common is that we've had the experience of being on the weekend and sort of through that knowing the love of this wonderful woman and what it has meant in our lives and what the weekend does for each one of us. And so I thank you for letting me come and be with you. And so what I want to do first is sort of share with you in her words what Beginning Experience is. So if Sister Josephine were here and she were speaking to us, what she would say is, Beginning Experience is a gentle process in which people who are widowed, divorced, or separated are invited to pass through their grief and to gently close the door on the past in order to be transformed into a new life. It is an experience, not an encounter as was popular in the 1970s. It is a gradual process focusing on passing through, not over or around grief. The program is based on the solid theology that Christ lives, dies, and rises in each person. There is a distinction between phases and method. Combined, they form the process. So when I say process, I am referring to both the phases and the method. The first phase is looking at oneself, and the last phase ends with reaching out to others. Between those phases, the participants reflect in a personal way on their passage through the grief stages. They reflect on their trust of themselves, others, and God. The phases continue by helping the participants sort out their guilt. They offer an opportunity for forgiving and being forgiven. Finally, each person is invited to close the door on the past, to start anew, and reach out to others. All is done in safety and with others who are going through their grief too. To achieve the phases, the method consists of 3 parts, which are repeated throughout the weekend. Listening to the personal life story talks given by team members, private reflecting by participants sharing in small groups. The small group is where a special bond with others is established. The method is what lends rhythm and flow to the weekend. Peace and joy are evident throughout. The presenters and group leaders are themselves widowed, separated, or divorced. This is what makes them peers. Therefore, they're not talking down to the participants from some professional viewpoint. They are peers, having experienced a grief similar to that of the participants, but those who have been trained as ministers. Joe Lamia and I knew that broken people can be made whole through this process, which was discovered in her story. So really, that's what Sister Josephine would say to each of us today, beginning experience really is. And she's exactly right. And so what I want to share with you today is a little bit about who Sister Josephine was, who Joe Lamia was, and really what the process was that brought beginning experience into being. Sister Josephine was quite a character besides being a really wonderful person. I described her, I know you all are going to go to Mass this evening at the cathedral, and besides being just the Feast of Pentecost, which it is, it's also this evening the sending of the neophytes, which the bishop is going to celebrate this Mass, and this is a special Mass for all the people who came into the church with the Easter sacraments tonight. And you're going to see Sister Mary Timothea, who is the director of formation, and she and I were having a conversation about Sister Josephine, and she said, well, I didn't know her. Tell me a little bit about her. And in describing her to Sister Timothea, I said, well, you know, her heart was as big as the state of Texas. Mm-hmm. And that is exactly one of the things that I think most about her. She had, her bachelor's degree was in home economics. She could cook like crazy, and she could sew anything that she wanted to make. She was a very, very, very creative kind of individual. And then she had a master's degree in education, and so in her early career as a sister, she was working in education, and pretty early on became the principal of the girls division of Bishop Dunn High School in Dallas. And by the way, she hated that job, and she was very clear about that. But that was her early job, and so because she did not really like that, she pretty early got out of that and went into doing counseling work. So in addition to those 2 official degrees, she also had about 300 hours in postgraduate work in counseling, psychology, psychiatry courses. Now, that probably would equal about 2 doctoral degrees if you actually did the coursework and added that up together. So to say that she was qualified in what she was doing is an understatement. And so she happened to, she tells a funny story in this book. This particular book is her book, Letting Go. You can get this book on Amazon.com if you're interested in getting it. So it's her book about her, kind of her life story. But she tells the story in there of how she happened to make a weekend program called The Happening. And The Happening was a program that was offered through the Catholic Renewal Center in Fort Worth, Texas. The Catholic Renewal Center was founded in 1972. It was a lay retreat center, and is a lay retreat center, although it's going to cease to exist at the end of June, actually, because they've lost their lease. But it has offered a number of programs, and it has been run by a board of both clergy and lay people all through these years. And one of the first programs that they offered there was a program called The Happening. And The Happening was a weekend retreat, sort of like the beginning experience, but it focused on the questions, who am I? What is my relationship to other people? And what do I know and feel about God? What is my relationship with God? And that was really the 3 questions that you answered when you made the weekend. And Sister Josephine kept running into people that had made the Happening weekend. And she sort of kept kind of like bumping into The Happening weekend. And at that time, I think she was kind of a person that was sort of tied up in herself, you know, and not too eager to let herself be known to other people, and sort of straight-laced, you know. Not at all the person that we came to know. And finally, she tells the story of driving in her little red Volkswagen Beetle and stopping at a stopping light and deciding, I think I'm going to make The Happening weekend. And one of the people that she had met as a teacher was Joe Lamia, because she had happened to teach one of her students, but Joe also happened to be one of the people who was on the team at The Happening. And so she called the person, Gail Smith, who was one of the people who actually was the founder of the Catholic Renewal Center, and said, do you have room for me to make the Happening this weekend? And Gail said, why, sure, come on. Well, that weekend actually changed her life. It opened her up. It sort of took her barriers down. It made her willing to open herself to people, to let her emotions come out, to be open to hugging you and sharing who she really was with you, and not being afraid to do that. And she could say, later, I could see the beginning experience coming out of that weekend when I looked back at that. And out of that, they asked her if she would be on the team to do the happening, and she said yes. And Joe Lamia was on that team, and so she and Joe became very good friends. Shortly after that, she left, that she decided that she would get into really doing counseling work full time. And Father Bob Wilson, who was the pastor of St. John the Apostle Parish in North Richland Hills, Texas, approached the Sisters of St. Mary and asked for her to come to the parish as a parish counselor on staff. And she did that. And after she was there, she began to work on writing a weekend retreat program for engaged couples based on the format of Marriage Encounter, called Engaged Encounter, and that would operate out of the Catholic Renewal Center. And she said, yes, I will do that, but I would like for Joe Lamia to work on that program with me. Because by this time, Joe had gone through a divorce, and she had 2 grown sons, but she said, I think Joe has a lot to offer from the experiences of a failed marriage. I think she could offer a lot. So I would really like for her to work on developing that program with me. Fine, that'd be great. She can do that. So in order to prepare for writing that program, she knew she wanted to base it on the format of Marriage Encounter. So she said, you know, I think I need to make a marriage encounter. So she asked Joe, Joe, would you go and make this marriage encounter with me? We'll be the really odd couple there, but I need to go make this weekend. And Joe said, okay, I'll go with you and we'll make the weekend together. So off they went to marriage encounter. Well, a really amazing thing happened. Because what's the format of marriage encounter? The couple goes, they listen to presentations by married couples, they go away, they write the answers to the questions, and then they share as a couple. Well, the couple that were sharing together were Sister Josephine and Joe Lamia. And at first, Joe would always tell the story. I would sit and I would doodle, or I would draw pictures, because I'm not going to answer these stupid questions, you know. But then eventually she began to write about her feelings, and she came to understand that she had never really dealt with her feelings about her failed marriage. And what was my part in this failed marriage? Because she had just blamed Peter. It was his fault. It wasn't her fault this marriage didn't work out. I was the perfect wife. There was no reason this didn't work out. It was his fault, obviously. So if he had done what he needed to do, this would have all been different. So as she went through the weekend, she began to deal with her feelings and accept her part in the failure of her marriage. And as you can imagine, she cried and cried and cried and began to let go. And by the end of the weekend, could begin to let it go and say, I'm ready to begin to close this door and move forward. So for Sister Josephine, it was like, oh my goodness, there is a bigger issue than an engaged encounter. I can develop engaged encounter and I can get it going, but there's a bigger issue here than the one that I thought I was going to work on. So she left engaged encounter and did develop it and did get it going. But out of being there with Joe on that weekend, she walked away and really began to write. And she took Joe's notebook from the weekend and all the reflecting that Joe had done, and she took it away and she began to really start to formulate her ideas around what a weekend would be if she created one for people who were dealing with the loss and the separation of a failed relationship. What would that look like? Either failure or the loss of a spouse through death, because either one would apply. Now, the interesting thing, too, that I think was a complicating factor then, I think it still exists today, but I think it was stronger 40 years ago, was how people felt about being Catholic and dealing with separation and divorce, particularly. Because in those days, particularly, many of the clergy weren't really sure what to do with us. Many of them had very strong feelings about us. The teachings of the church then were no different than they are now. The fact that you were separated and even divorced did not remove you from the sacraments. But boy, a lot of them didn't know how to deal with that, and a lot of them actually did believe that it did. I had a situation happen to me where I had, just like everybody else, I had a full-time job, but all my life I've been involved in church music, and I was working part-time as the director of music in a church in Texas, and got a call to do some music for a youth event. I lived in Arlington, Texas, and got a call to do some music at a youth event in the original parish in Arlington, Texas, which was, Monsignor Riley, who was the pastor there, was a pretty staunchly old-style Catholic priest. And the music director said, we'd like something a little more contemporary, and I play guitar, and so I went, and a couple went with me who were married in the church, and he had grown up in that parish, and his wife had been married before, but they were married in the church. So the three of us went, that he played guitar, she played flute, I played guitar, and we went and did the music for this event. So we were the last three walking up for communion, and when Monsignor Riley, when it got to us, he turned around and walked away and would not give us communion. And that kind of thing happened more frequently than people wanted to admit would happen. And so oftentimes people found themselves in situations where they weren't sure they had a place in the church, either because something did happen or in their own mind they weren't sure. So for Catholics, I think, maybe even still today, but certainly back then even more so, we were trying to deal with what does this really mean in my relationship with my church, as well as what are my personal emotions around it, and how do I reconcile it? How do I find peace? How do I suddenly deal with this change in my life? How do I go forward? How do I support myself? How do I find a job? I mean, all those things, and how do I go? How do I live now that my world is upside down? So I think what Sister Josephine was seeing was so much need and so much emotion. And I know she made the comment to me one time that she found those of us who were dealing with all this to be such real people. And she said, in my parish counseling job, she said, people who just live the normal life, when they come in to see me, the things that they want to talk to me about are what are the books that I'm reading. And when I deal with people like you and other people who come to a beginning experience weekend, or people who are really facing life challenges, these are the people that I love and the people that I can put my arms around and embrace and really help them deal with something. So she, in her life, felt such a love for us and such a desire to help us move from a life of pain to a life of moving forward. So when she saw what had happened with Joe on that weekend, she gathered together, as she did this outline for this weekend, she gathered together people that she knew were experts in the field. Dr. Harville Hendricks, he was a psychiatrist who was on staff at SMU, people of that caliber, as well as some couples that she had worked with that she knew would be good team facilitators. And she had this outline, and she planned a pilot weekend in October of 1974. We're just about to roll up to 40 years, a 40-year anniversary. And so and I cannot remember how that pilot weekend got advertised. I made that pilot weekend. I remember that. It was at the Renewal Center. And so there were probably about 20 of us that made the pilot weekend. We paid a whopping $5 to make the pilot weekend. And it covered our meals. I remember on that. Some wonderful people came and cooked for us to make the pilot weekend. And out of that, they tapped people. They talked to us at the end if we had been selected to be asked to be the team for the December 1st weekend. And so from that, it was created. What I also remember is that Sister Josephine, there is a Diocese of Fort Worth and a Diocese of Dallas, and at that time, Bishop John Casada was the Bishop of Fort Worth, and Bishop Thomas Shapey was the Bishop of Dallas. So after the pilot weekend was held, and it looked like, this is going to successfully work. Sister Josephine went and met with each bishop. Well, I think Bishop Quesada's attitude was, this renewal center is in my diocese, and the fact that I'm letting it be here is my sanction of it. And when she went and met with Bishop Shapey was a very kind and loving, almost grandfatherly type of man. And she gave the outline of the weekend to each of them, and I have no idea what the outline looks like today, so I have no idea what experience you guys went through recently. But as he looked at it, he did, and I laugh and say, this is exactly what Bishop Sticka would have done. When we had the talks in the Renewal Center were always done in the chapel, and we all sat on the floor for the talks. And Bishop Shapey looked at the outline of the weekend, and he came for what we lovingly called the sex talk, and he came and sat on the floor with us. And we said, well, this will be a real interesting experience. And he sat there with us, and at the end, he looked, and I can remember, I see his face right now, and he smiled, and he said, this is going to be a very good thing. I mean, he was just such a loving man, and he was so very supportive of what was happening. And he loved everyone who was there, hugged us all, and always gave his loving support to everything that happened with that program. So that was kind of how the first weekend came to be. And then the word began to spread. The knowledge of it began to spread. It would be advertised in parish bulletins. When the next beginning experience was going to be held, we held about 2 a year. Can't remember exactly what year, maybe a couple of years later, a year or two later, the very first, an organization was being formed up in the Boston area called the North American Conference of Separated and Divorced Catholics. We went to that. Actually, Sister Josephine tells in the book, I've teased her that she forgot that I went on the trip with them, but she and Joe and I made the trip to Boston for the conference of the North American Conference of Separated and Divorced Catholics held their first meeting in Boston. It was just forming. There must have been 2,500, 3,000 people there. Father Jim Young was the first president of that group, and I remember he made the statement, there's a sister from Fort Worth, Texas, who's here, Sister Josephine Stewart, and she was kind of a short woman, and he said, she's got this blonde girl with her. I guess that was me. She's got this blonde girl with her, and they're going to be standing over at the side of the conference room, and they're doing this beginning experience down there. So if you all want to talk to them at break, and it was like the whole room just stormed to meet her. They just wanted to touch her. They wanted to see her. People had heard about it. They just wanted the experience of being close to her. She was just that magnetic. And so then people from Oklahoma City came. People started coming to the weekend to find out about the weekend, to learn about it, and it just began to blossom. It began to go to Ireland, to Australia, New Zealand. It just began to take off. In 1981, Sister Josephine released the leadership of the organization to Father Guy Gow, because I think she began to realize that if she tried to administer this organization as it was growing, it would become so time-consuming that she wouldn't be able to focus on anything but administration. And I don't think that was what she desired to do at all. And that's a good thing, because her heart was too big to be caught in being an office person. That would have never been a good thing for her to do. She then went on to do other things as well. She spent a few years, she lived in New Zealand for a year. She lived out in Tacoma, Washington in a large community which is, handicapped people. She did that for a few years. The last active years of her life she spent in Wichita Falls, Texas. She became quite an artist. I feel very fortunate that I've got a couple of pieces of her art that I brought. I actually brought some things to share with you. I'll pass around. This is her obituary. I love how it prints out. I hope you got good eyes.
Is it on the webpage?
Is it on the Beginning Experience website? I don't know. If you haven't seen it, it's here. This is a picture of Sister Josephine from the time when she started the beginning experience, and I'll pass that around. This is just, how we all think of her and remember her. This is a picture of Joe Lamia. We all talk about Joe. I think it's very gracious of Sister Josephine, who always described Joe as the co-founder. Do not kid yourself. We all know who the founder of Beginning Experience was, and Joe would have said the very same thing. Joe died in 1987. I did the music for Joe's funeral. Joe died from bone cancer. She was sick for about 10 months before she died. She was very, very ill at the end of her life. She was older than Sister Josephine, probably, I would guess Joe was probably about 60 when she died, so she was a good bit older than Sister Josephine. But she was a wonderful, wonderful person. I spent many a holiday in her home. And I will tell you, Sister Josephine was a second mother to me. Sister Josephine gathered the original Beginning Experience people together about 5 years ago at the 35th. It was in the late summer. I'd say it wasn't right at the 35th anniversary of the first weekend, but we did a Catholic Renewal Center, and she got us together. She said, we need to have an anniversary party. And so we were at the Renewal Center, and she wanted us all to be together again, which I'm really glad she did. And a lot of us were together through Skype, those who could, but I did manage to get back to Fort Worth for it, and it was great to be with her. I was glad that was the last time I saw her, and so I was really glad that I was there. So you guys can see it. This is a picture actually from when my husband and I got married in 1980, and we're doing our vows, and that's Sister Josephine with us, so I'll pass that around with you. You can see that. And I have 2 pieces of art that she did. She did a number of note cards. And most of them were black and white. She happened to do, this is a color one that she did. This was from 1999, and so I just took it and framed it. And this is an actual oil painting of hers. I did check, Karen asked me about whether or not there was other artwork of hers available. So I called the sisters on Thursday and said, is there any of her artwork still available? And they said no, that the last of it had been in Wichita Falls, and when they did a memorial service there, any that was left was sold, and so there is none available any longer. But I feel very fortunate that I have a couple pieces of it, so I'm very thankful for that. She did spend the last couple of years of her life in a nursing home because she'd had 2 knee replacements, and she just was not able to get around more than anything else. And then once they moved her to the hospice hospital in Fort Worth, as it turned out, we were going to Fort Worth for Mother's Day. I'd not been with my kids and grandkids for Mother's Day in several years, and so we just ran over there for Mother's Day. And when I got to Fort Worth, I called there and talked to the nurses, and it was storming like crazy. And I said, is she able to have visitors? And they said, oh yes, she's had quite a few visitors. She is at the end of her life. She's probably not going to know that you're there. And I said, you know what, that's A-okay. I want to come anyway. I'll be there in the morning. And when I got there, she had passed away late the night before. But the nurses were so nice. I mean, I started crying. The nurses were so nice, and they were so kind to me, and they let me talk about her, and they were so sweet about it. And they said, we've heard the most wonderful stories about her. And I said, you need to understand, you will never know how many lives, not just here, but around the world, this woman has changed and will continue to change. Her legacy will live on long past her lifetime. And so I thanked them very much. And then I told the sisters, I said, because I couldn't stay, we had ordinations here. We've got one last Saturday, one next Saturday. I had to get back here. So, and her funeral was not for another week. And so the sisters were very sweet because they wrote me a very sweet letter, and they said that her vigil service was so sweet because so many Beginning Experience people came and told wonderful stories of how much the beginning had meant to them and changed their lives. And my sense was that the sisters all knew that beginning was important and how important it was to Sister Josephine, but I think they probably didn't appreciate the magnitude of it or the depth of it until people came forward, and then they were somewhat, you know, I think it was very meaningful to them. So 2 of them have written to me since then to tell me how meaningful it was to them, and so that was very sweet that they wrote to me and told me. So. So really, that's really all I wanted to share. That's as much as I could share. I could go on for hours, but that wouldn't be fair to you. I want you to get to do your other things. But I again want to thank you for letting me come. I just, there's no way I can tell you how special she is and always will be to me. And I thank you too for making the weekend, and I hope it will always be as important in your life as it's always been in mine. I did not meet my husband at a weekend. I happened to meet him. I got a call once to go to do it was probably like a local beginning group was doing a novena through Lent for you know, separated and divorced and widowed people, and my husband's first wife had passed away. And so they said, would you come and do the music? And I thought they meant once. I didn't know they meant, because I did not live close to there, I did not know that they meant for all the weeks of Lent until I got there the first time. But that's where I met my husband, and we ended up getting married a little over almost about 16 months later. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for
You.
sharing.
Hope it
work continues, because it's definitely changed my life. I'm sure the weekend has changed a lot of lives, and will continue to do so.
And you know, the wonderful thing too is it gives you such a wonderful support group among each other. Gives you new friends.